Tamiris and Sargon are two very similar commanders because the best thing they have in their kit is their massive debuff. And I've had a lot of players who know that I've studied Tamiris quite in depth ask me to look into Sargon a lot more and talk about Sargon and Tamiris and compare both commanders, talk about which commanders are better, the pros and cons, everything you need to know about them. So today I'll be talking about Sargon, I'll give you pros and cons, I'll talk about Tamiris, and I'll give you pros and cons for her. And then I'll tell you which commander will fit different marches for different players, obviously, so who basically should invest in either commander. And then in the end, I will give you my final verdict on which commander is actually better. Starting off with Tamiris, a commander I've made a video for before, I'm going to talk about her pros first. First of all, her debuff is really easy to just use. The way she inflicts her poison debuff, which makes the opponent take an extra 3% skill damage per stack, is just attacking the opponent. So all normal attacks with Tamiris, as you can see on screen, basically just make the opponent take more damage. Pretty simple if you ask me. Now, another pro with Tamiris is that each stack can stack up to 15 times. So she can have a maximum of 40% increased skill damage taken for the opponent, which is basically the highest amount of skill damage taken increase like in the game by far. Another thing I really like about Tamiris is she's got a nice passive defense reduction on her third skill. That means it will stack with Nevsky, it will stack with commanders like Ramsey's defense reduction. So a lot of these things do matter with Tamiris since she's really only there to be a debuff commander. Another thing I really like about Tamiris is that when she throws her active skill, the more poison she has, the more damage she would deal. Basically, Tamiris can deal up to like 2,200 damage factor on her active skill. That's if you have 15 stacks of Ord, which is really tough to get. But I mean, if you did have it, that's a lot of skill damage, and it's definitely something I wouldn't be laughing at. Another thing with Tamiris that I do kind of like is when you expertise her, she gains 10% increased counterattack. I think that's actually a pretty nice buff for a commander who's missing a lot of stats. And that brings me on to the cons. Tamiris has like no stats. She's got 30% increased attack, 10% increased attack on her expertise, and 10% increased counterattack on her expertise. Plus, she reduces the damage from cav units when she's attacked by 10%. Really nothing too major there. Like, you're looking at a commander who's got no march speed, got no defense, got no health, she's got no all damage, she's got no skill damage that she personally deals being increased. She's only just got this insane debuff and a fairly good active skill. Another thing I don't really like with Tamiris is with her debuff, you actually do lose it when you throw the active skill. So it removes the poison effects and inflicts the poison damage, which is basically the damage I was telling you about that I really like. If it was the other way around, where she just inflicts the poison damage and doesn't remove the effects, she would have been so powerful, it's not funny. But I mean, she's still one of those commanders that you would rather have her debuff over her active skill damage. Another con with Tamiris is that her second skill is basically completely irrelevant in every way whatsoever. You gain 10% increased attack, but deal 10% less counterattack when you're attacking a city. 30% increased attack when you max it, sorry. So this skill is completely redundant in like every way, and it's not worth it. Plus, to get Tamiris' debuff, another con is you actually have to get the fourth skill. So to actually be able to use her, you have to either get super lucky and land on that fourth skill, or you have to basically max her up until that point, which is very annoying for a lot of, let's say, low spender free to players. Myself, I wouldn't care about her rally skill. But if I want to use her debuff, I have to get to her fourth skill, which is one thing that really put me off Tamiris. If it was like a 5-5-1-1 commander, I may actually have a Tamiris in my murder ball. But since it's a 5-1-1-5 commander you have to get, it's not that good. The third skill is arguably still pretty good even if you do land on it, but you would still rather max that fourth skill first to get the poison, because that's the most important thing Tamiris has. Another thing I don't like about Tamiris is the best way to use her debuff is basically to gain less rage. So what I really don't like when I'm using a Tamiris is the fact that she can only go with a select few archer commanders. So if we just look at the archer commanders right now, she won't work with YSG, she won't work with Cyrus, she won't really work with Henry because Henry needs rage, she won't really work with Boudica because Boudica benefits from having a lot of rage. She's not the best with Nebuchadnezzar. She is definitely not going to work with El Cid because it's going to get melted. She's not going to work with Thutmose because it's going to get melted. And putting her with a Manatore means you're silence immune, so if you get silenced, she's shrugging the silence off, and that's also not going to work. And basically, she wouldn't really work too bad with Gilgamesh, she wouldn't work too bad with Ramses, and she wouldn't work too bad with Edward of Woodstock or Artemisia. That's it. Every other archer commander in the list, like Ramses, could pair with almost any commander here, and I would say it would be a somewhat okay pair. YSG can literally pair with every single archer commander besides Tamiris, and it would still be a somewhat usable pair. So she's very not flexible in that manner, where you can just put her with different commanders and just use her regardless of which commander you want. You can't really swap a Tamiris. If you have a Tamiris, you're going to get another commander to go with her, and that's going to be basically a set march. Starting off with Sargon the Great's pros, the first thing is he is super stat heavy. Sargon the Great is loaded with stats. Like you can see on his second skill, 10% increased attack, 20% increased health. Third skill, 15% march speed, 10% all damage, 10% chance to deal 30% all damage. Fourth skill, straight up 10% infantry defense. And when you expertise Sargon, he's taking 15% less skill damage if he's being attacked, which I think is really, really good. Another pro I really like about Sargon is that his active skill isn't dropping off his Ord effect. So that means when Sargon is attacking, he can use his active skill as much as you want, and it won't really be damaging his Ord effect at all. If anything, it's benefiting him. So using that active skill isn't a bad thing with Sargon compared to when you're using it with Tomyris. So you can actually put Sargon behind a commander as some sort of a rage engine because he does have the skill tree. You put Sargon, let's say, I don't know, behind Scipio. Scipio is a support commander who has stupidly high rage gain once you throw your first active skill. Sargon's going to trade perfectly fine. It won't even affect how his debuff works because you don't have to worry about keeping that rage under. You can also use a Horn of Fury with him, and anything that boosts your rage like a Joan Prime or a normal Joan of Arc is going to actually be beneficial for Sargon. Another pro is I really like Sargon's expertise, and I think it doesn't get as much credit as it deserves. So whenever you're hit, there's a 50% chance to inflict 2 stacks of Ord on an enemy target. So these 2 stacks of Ord that you're inflict to everyone swarming you. To my knowledge, there is no cap on this, okay? It doesn't tell you there is. So let's say you're getting 7 swarmed with your Sargon in a 7 march murder ball, you're clashing it with someone else. Let's say they hit your Sargon first. They go for your Scipio Sargon march, something like that. They're going to be taking a bunch of Ord stacks straight to the face on all of their marches. So that means any march with an AoE like Guan or Harold or YSG or anyone with AoE, Joan Prime, is basically going to be dealing an increased damage to like every single march that they're hitting you with. So I really do like that, having that basically revenge debuff. I've never really seen it in that manner, but I think it's a really cool thing. Also, whenever he has his shield effect, so his 4th skill, whenever that activates, he actually does inflict an extra Ord effect whenever he's attacked, so it will be 3 instead of 2. And that means basically within 6 turns of being swarmed, all the opponents are taking like 30% more skill damage, and it's a really good anti-swarm for Sargon. Starting off with the cons for Sargon, Sargon actually needs to deal skill damage to launch his Ord effect. So you can see, whenever this commander deals skill damage, he has a 50% chance to inflict a stack of Ord on the target's troops, which increases skill damage taken by 3% for 10 seconds, a maximum of 10 stacks. So you really do kind of want to put him with an AoE commander so you can launch that skill damage debuff everywhere. So another thing I don't like about Sargon is that his debuff only stacks 10 times. So that means that Tomyris' debuff, which stacks 15 times, is actually better. She's A, dealing it more often, and B, it stacks more. So I really do like that about Tomyris in comparison to the Sargon, because Sargon is lacking in that regard, with his debuff only stacking 10 times. Another thing I don't like about Sargon is basically how his 4th skill works. You can see he gets that defense, which is nice, but when the target troop has received 10 stacks of Ord, all stacks will be removed. This target troop will be dealt damage factor of 1000, and in addition, this commander's troops will receive a shield that lasts for 5 seconds, damage factor of 300. So he gets a shield of 300, the opponent takes 1000 damage factor, but they completely lose their 10 stacks of Ord. So that's not a very good thing to be losing. That's why unless you're going straight for the expertise on Sargon, you only take him to 5-5-5-0. You don't even unlock that 4th skill because it actually makes him weaker. Now, one thing to keep in mind here as well is that once he's expertised, it's kind of worth it because if you get hit, even if you're not targeting that troop, they don't lose their Ord effect. So expertising him is certainly worth it in the end compared to Tomyris, who basically gets all her value with her first skill and last skill, and that's it. And the final thing I don't really like about Sargon is the way his active skill works. I understand why it's done this way, but the only way you deal damage is by hitting the opponent for 5 seconds. So for the next 5 seconds, normal attacks have a 100% chance to deal a damage factor of 500 once he's maxed that skill. So basically, if you're hitting the opponent with this skill and they run away, that's it, they're gone. You've lost the skill really, and they've run away, and basically the Ord effects are kind of wasted because they'll just run away and they'll wear off. So I don't really like that too much about Sargon. If it was like you deal 5 turns worth of skill damage in 1 turn and it counts as like 5 Ord effects, or you deal skill damage and you deal 4 Ord effects, and then after this skill here, you inflict 1 Ord effect per skill damage, so you end up with 5 Ord effects regardless, I think that would have been stronger. But basically, the reason they made his active skill deal damage over 5 seconds is because Sargon actually does need to inflict a lot of skill damage in different turns so he can inflict his Ord debuff. However, it used to be when I first read Sargon's skills, for the next 5 seconds, the opponent takes 500 direct damage factor. So that was much better, but then once I said for the next 5 seconds, normal attacks have a 100% chance to deal direct damage factor, then it wasn't as good because you actually have to hit the enemies to be doing that. Now, when would I choose a Tomyris or when would I choose a Sargon? Well, if you were going for a pure debuff smashing march that doesn't really matter too much about stats or damage, and you've got the commanders for it, then Tomyris is the commander you choose. Tomyris' debuff is just better than Sargon's. You're doing 15% more of the debuff, I guess. You are easily inflicting it compared to Sargon, where you have to deal skill damage. And you are also dealing an extra debuff on that for third skill. So I really like Tomyris much more than Sargon if you're going for just a debuff march. And in that situation, I would be picking Tomyris. So if you've got 6 marches, you don't have a Sargon, and you want a debuff march only, you'd get a Tomyris. However, if you were going for a more open field battling approach where you want to trade good with your Sargon, like actually get good trades, because you aren't going to trade amazingly with Tomyris, it's just going to make you trade better with other marches, then you get Sargon. Because Sargon's got so many stats, he's got a lot of damage factor if you can let it land on the opponent, and he's just got march speed and stuff that Tomyris is really lacking. So having a Sargon is certainly worth it if you're looking for a more tanky and a more, like, a march that's still going to trade better, but you are missing out a little bit on the debuffs that Tomyris provides in comparison to Sargon. I reckon Sargon's debuffs are like 75% of what Tomyris actually brings, maybe 70%. So if you're going for an infantry march that's kind of like a Tomyris, you don't really want to use Tomyris, then Sargon is the guy. But you would probably want to expertise Sargon compared to Tomyris, where you only need a Tomyris really at 5-1-1-5, or 5-1-5-5 is still very good. Now, overall, which commander do I think is better? I'm still giving it to Sargon. I think Sargon's actually worth it as a second infantry march, just because of the amount of stats he provides, how much damage he does, he's got march speed, health, all of these things are still very, very strong. And then his debuff is kind of just like an extra cherry on the pie. So I think Sargon is still a better commander than Tomyris, but Tomyris still serves a lot of usages. And if you're considering investing in it, I will have a video on the end screen for you to check out. These videos take hours to make. Between the research, the thumbnails, the editing, all of these things take a lot of time. And all I ask for you guys in return is to please subscribe to the channel. I just want to push out the best content I can for everyone, and your subscription really does mean a lot to me. I also just want to mention that I'm running a jumper group, and on the end screen of this video, there'll be another video linked. If you're more interested in joining me in the jumper group, check that video out. I talk about what jumper groups are, and basically, I invite you to join me in that video because I've got the link to the jumper group that I'm joining inside of that video. I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.